Hi guys, Will Terry here, and today's video is going to be called, What if the author's question is stupid? Okay, but before we get into that, a few announcements as always. The first thing is, this video is sponsored by svslearn.com, where you can get all of our illustration classes for one low monthly subscription price. I also wanted to mention this is going to be it's not my first, probably my second question and answer video. And I got questions from everywhere. I pulled from Facebook, I pulled from YouTube, and I pulled from Twitter. So I've started the hashtag AskWillTerry, hashtag AskWillTerry. And so from now on, if I get questions on YouTube, I'm just going to say put it in the hashtag WillTerry, because it was hard to pull all these together. And I'm a little bit unorganized because of it. And I just want to basically, you can ask a question anytime. And what I'll do is I'll just pull up that hashtag and I'll look at the questions that I've answered before. And from now on, I'm just going to pull from those and just read them. And if you have to ask more, if you have to use more than one tweet, go ahead, just tweet 2, 3, or 4 of them in a row with that hashtag, and they'll show up in order, and I can, if there's not enough room with your 140 characters or whatever. Okay. Next thing. So I thought I would start off answering one of my own questions, and that is why. It's a question that I think I might have if I were you. Oh, you know what? Before I get into that, I was going to say this is going to be a long one, so get your favorite beverage. You might want to pause the video. You got to go to the bathroom. Minimize it and get it on the right screen or in the right place, and get something that you're working on. Start drawing, do something fun. Okay, so why did I name it, when it's a whole bunch of questions, why did I name it what if the author's story is stupid? That's one of the questions that I'm going to answer. And quite frankly, if I named this video Will Terry answers questions, nobody would click on it. So there's this game that you got to play if you're running a YouTube channel, which I'm sure you've seen. People title their videos all kinds of things, and they try to come up with a kind of a provocative title. My phone's freaking out here, so I'm going to silence that. And unfortunately, we live in a world of titles and of catchy phrases and provocative titles and things like that, and so in order to get seen, in order to get watched, because quite frankly, if I didn't have any audience, I probably would stop doing this. But the fact that you guys are watching and commenting is what makes it fun, and what kind of gives me purpose for doing this. And I love doing it, and I love answering questions. So I'm just going to start. If you asked one and I somehow didn't get it on this video, just go ahead and put it under that hashtag, and I will definitely get to it next time. So the first one is from Samir. I was curious about art direction stuff, so just firing out questions here to you. What exactly does an art director do? Or what do you do as an art director? If I am experienced as a character concept artist, can I become an art director as well? How do you manage to get an art director job? Is it experience, age? What stuff do you do as an art director? So those are good questions, and there's really probably no way to really give one concise answer. An art director means something different for every kind of every field that it's in. So you'll have art directors in video games. You'll have art directors in children's books. You'll have art directors on movie sets. You'll have art directors for comic books and graphic novels, for animation, anything. And basically, it is the person who gets to, in many cases, choose the direction that the art will take in the thing that they're working on. So, for instance, if they're working on a children's book, the art director gets to choose the illustrator along with the editor. In other walks, in other fields, sometimes the art director will have more power. The art director has a lot of influence over who gets chosen, what style of art. Often the art director will work with the editor or with the author and come up with the content of what the illustrations will look like. So for instance, if you're illustrating a book and there's a story, the art director will go through sometimes, in some cases, and decide what scenes will be illustrated out of the book. Because, in the book, you could choose for one page, you could choose, 10 different options. And sometimes the art director will narrow that down and then give a synopsis of that, or a little description of that illustration to the illustrator to then illustrate. So that's one of the hats that the art director wears. Another one is simply art directors are graphic designers as well. And more often than not, in the publishing world, the art director is the one who is designing the type treatments for the book. And so you'll work directly, if you're doing a children's book, you'll work directly with that art director. I talk a lot about children's books because I am a children's book illustrator. That's kind of how I define myself amongst other things that I do. And so that's kind of in my wheelhouse, but that's basically what a graphic designer does. Now, how do you get that job? I would say I've never had an art director job. I've never really asked how you get that job, but because they are graphic designers for the most part as well, and that's in publishing. In movie direction, I would say that's not the case at all. In being an art director in motion in film, but in print, I think you would probably have to have a degree in graphic design or show a really, really strong portfolio in graphic design to get a job in art direction. If anybody has more to add to that, I would love to hear it in the comments, and I'm sure Samir could read the comments too and get something out of that. Okay, next question comes from, and I hope I say this right, Adalia, and she asks, and I hope that's a she, thank you so much for your videos. I wanted to ask you whether you could perhaps make a video and give a suggestion on how to protect the illustration work, how you should properly show it without worrying that people will take it without paying. Should you only show sketches? What if they ask you to send them the complete artwork to see and then take it once they've got it? Thank you in advance. So there's a lot in there, and we could spend a lot of time just on those questions alone. But I'm a risk taker. Inherently, I'm a risk taker because I'm an entrepreneur. I realize that a lot of my efforts are not going to pay out. A lot of my efforts are going to fail, but hopefully the ones that pay out big. And some people are risk averse, and some people are really careful, and just having something stolen or something taken just really bothers them. And I can't fault you for feeling that way. But for me, I just don't care. I subscribe to the idea that I want my work taken, not by a client that's got money, but typically good clients with money don't take your work. So, and if it's a bad client, if it's a person without much money and they take your work, that's kind of a risk that you take by playing the game. Just by playing the game, you're already kind of risking in a way. And the thing is, a client that's going to steal your work is probably a client that doesn't have any money. And if you know about the legal system, I don't know if you're living in the U.S. or out of the U.S., but in the U.S., it's very hard to take someone to court. If you are successful to actually get them into court, which could take many, many months and many thousands of dollars and many hours of your personal work trying to work with an attorney. If you get them into court, you could lose. If you get them into court and you win, they don't pay you there. They're supposed to pay you. And so then the judge gives them an order to pay you. And what if they don't pay you then? Then you got to take them back to court again. I'm moving forward. So I personally, I work on the next thing. If somebody steals or takes something from me, I weigh it out and I look at it, and I if I feel successful, if I feel like there's a reasonable chance of me being successful by going the court route, I guess I would probably do that. But in most cases, and I would say, 99.9 out of 100, I'm just gonna call it a wash and move forward and work on the next thing, because I've known people, I've talked about this in videos before, who have been on the right side of the law, who have won as far as being able to show that they're in the right, and they've never been able to get the client who was in the wrong into a courtroom after spending over $20,000 to attorneys. And so I don't worry about that much. I think that that's a possibility, that someone's going to maybe steal your illustration work, but I've never had that happen. And I've been doing this for I guess going on 22 or 23 years, and I've just never had anybody steal my work that I've seen. So I'm just not worried about it. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. One of the biggest obstacles I've struggled with that's made it hard to pursue an illustration career is the desire to own a home and establish a family someday. Growing up, I was always told this was impossible to accomplish as an artist, yet more and more I see artists doing this all the time. Could you please do a video about what strategies artists have used to accomplish these goals? Also, it would be great if you could interview more artists who transitioned into illustration from another career, and not just the superstars who are already great in school. So I'm actually had already planned to interview one of my former students, Adam Manoa, who is doing really well in many rights right now. And I might even have a few more join in that we might do a Google Hangout and kind of talk about that. Because I think that rather than have me spout out about it, it's been a long time since I've broken in, and I'd rather talk to people that have. But you have a lot of questions in here. And one thing I would like to say about this, if I don't get to say it in that chat with Adam, is that most people, and this is just a general rule, most of us live beyond our means, or we lie to ourselves and we tell ourselves that we need things or we have to have things. And the reason we have to have them is because everybody does. And being able to be successful as an artist and earn a living as an artist and have a home and have cars and have the things that you want to have and that you aspire to have, and the things that you need to raise a family, those will never be easy unless you are really good with your finances and really good at saying no to the things that you really don't need. And I can tell you right now that I know that there are people who have nicer cell phones than I do. There are people who have nicer cars than I do, and they make a fraction of the money that I make. And being able to that's probably the biggest thing right there, is that people that make what would be considered a pretty low, let me just throw out a figure. A family that makes $40,000 or $50,000 a year can live like they're poor, or they can live, they can be poor or they can be rich depending on how they spend their money. So for instance, and I think you already know what I'm going to say, but someone that makes $50,000 a year in the U.S., maybe they're husband and wife, and together they're bringing in $50,000 a year, and they've got a couple of kids. That's not a ton of money, but it's definitely enough money to have a car and an apartment and get by. It's even enough money to have a house if that family is willing to have. Maybe the husband and wife don't both have cell phones. I mean, when I grew up, we didn't have any cell phones. Now everybody has to have a cell phone, because how is anybody going to text you? See, I'm going to start going into rant mode here. But the thing is, you don't have to have everything that everybody says you have to have. You can be the weird person because you have your eyes set on something bigger. If you want to have that house, and you want to be able to, to keep pace with, get a locked in mortgage and not worry about your landlord raising your rent every few years, which is a really smart thing to do, then it's going to require sacrifices if you don't have, if you're not making a ton of money. But there are people who make $100,000 a year and cannot afford to get into a house simply because they can't wait. They can't delay gratification. So they've got tons of credit card debt. They've got car debt. Maybe they've got 2 really nice cars in the driveway and they live in an apartment and they cannot afford, they can't figure out how to save enough money to buy a house. So it's a lot less about how much money you're making and a lot more about your personal habits. And I'll leave it at that right now, and I'll defer to our conversation that we'll have in the future. Next, I got a lot of questions here, so hopefully you're getting a lot done on your drawing there. Hi, Will. This is from Vanessa. Hi, Will. Long-time listener, first-time caller, which is cute. What's the trick to not worrying about perfectly smooth shading and color? And that's a good question. I would say look at impressionistic paintings and look at really painterly paintings like John Singer Sargent paintings. And there's a bunch of artists that you could look at. James Stagg, I don't know if he's still painting, but he used to do really luscious, buttery oil paints. So look at Rob Ray, R-E-Y, I think, Rob Ray. I'll put a link to him. In fact, let me make a note of that. And I'm going to link him in here. If I don't do this, then I'll forget. Rob Ray is a good example because he's a young guy and he's up and coming and really making some really beautiful paintings. But if you analyze and you zoom in on his paintings, everything is not blended. It's blending, but it's not blended. It's not perfectly smooth shading or color as you say in there. So what's happening is your eye is optically mixing those together. So the trick to not worrying about perfectly smooth shading is to force yourself maybe to paint with a big brush. If you're drawing, maybe draw with a really dull pencil, and not worry about it being sharpened. And then you want to take your drawing or your painting and put it across the room and see what areas are blending together and see what areas are not. You might want to squint your eye at it and paint or draw while you're in shade while you're squinting your eye so that things are blurry, because then you'll see what's mixing and what's not. But again, if it's gradual, and it's not perfect, but it's really hard to put into words. But if there aren't really strong dark areas next to really strong white areas, then things will start to look like they're blending, without really worrying about. And I could probably show that in a demo a lot easier. So maybe that's something that I'll have to do in the future. So there's my crappy answer on that one. Okay, next is Vic. He asks advice on where to go to scan original art prints and other merchandise, and also he wants to start selling prints of his work. Currently building a website. Any advice? So, scanning original art for prints. That's kind of a tough one, because there used to be color houses before the internet and before digital cameras really came out. They were these big drum scanners, and so we used to, if we were going to go and get our work printed in a source book, which are also gone right now. Everything changed a lot in the last 20 years. You would go get a drum scan, and it would cost you anywhere from $50 to $80 to get a one piece of art scanned. But it would be a beautiful scan. It would scan it digitally. Now your options are basically find somebody who's got really good know-how on shooting. Copy work is what it's called in the industry, in the photography industry. It's called copy work. And I've got a photographer that lives close to where I live, where I used to have him shoot all my copy work, and he did an amazing job. This was after drum scanning. The next step was I went to this guy who has a photography house. So you might want to check any photography studios, and most of them are probably not going to be able to do this, but you have to ask them, do you do copy work? And there are some guys that can do it. There are some guys that can't. Some guys or gals that are good at it and some that aren't. And when they're not good at it, they'll get what's called noise in the scan, and that's little flecks of white reflection coming back. And if that's in your artwork at all in the scan, when you look at it on your computer, then they didn't do a good job and they suck and you can't use them. So you've really got to find somebody who's really good at that. Or another option is to get your own scanner, a flatbed scanner, and then do it yourself and learn how to sew it together in Photoshop. Photoshop now has had for the last few versions a thing called Photo Merge, which is amazing. So it will actually, if you have to do multiple passes because your artwork's too big for the scanner bed, Photoshop will do a really good job of sewing it together in most cases. You don't want it, if you know, now there's a limit to that. You really only want Photo Merge to be sewing together maybe 2 and 4 passes at the most. If you have something that's super huge and you have to do 6 or 8 passes, forget about it. I don't think Photo Merge is going to be able to do it for you there. You could still do it on your own, but that's going to be really hard, especially if you have a lot of pieces of art to do. So if your artwork's big, I would suggest getting a digital photograph of it from somebody who really knows how to do copy work, or buying a scanner and doing it yourself. Second part of your question is on selling prints on your website. I would suggest using a site like Etsy if you don't mind going to the post office. See, I'm not using Etsy right now simply because I don't want to go to the post office. So I'm using Society6. And basically that's for the people who really, really want to print. I don't really push it that hard. I don't make that much money off of it. If someone does, the nice thing about it is it's a lot like a lot of the other sites where, you set your profit margin. But it does take time to upload images and stuff like that. And so it's an option, but it's not the only option. I think if you're really serious about selling prints and getting the most money out of it, it's going to take a little bit more time to sell it on a site like Etsy, and take that and make regular trips to the post office maybe twice a week. You have days that you just go and slog through that horrible line in the post office. Okay, next is Erin, and she says, hey, Will, wondering what your experience was like selling original art aside from fan art at the Salt Lake City Comic-Con. Any luck with that? So what I found was that basically probably 85 to 90, probably more like 90% of the people didn't know me, didn't care about me, and just wanted the fan art. That's what they were looking at. Now, I also, to be fair, I didn't have a booth set up with all my color artwork. I really can't tell you what my experience would have been if I had, because, alternate universes, but basically I sold probably sold 10 prints of my color work, and they were hard to see in the booth because I had them inside, kind of, I had the front facing out, and then I had these sides where if people got close enough they could see them. And most of the people that bought those were people who knew me, and a couple of them were like a little frustrated. They were like, well, how come you're not selling more color stuff, and you're selling this fan art, but the color stuff is what you do, that's like, your thing and all. And I had a lot of people ask me that question, and usually they were people who knew me, and they're thinking from their eyes. But to do Comic-Con, I'm thinking, what do most of the people at Comic-Con want? And because I have fun doing these little fan art pieces, I just decided to do that because it's a ton of fun and it gives people what they want. And I might just do a little ghetto kind of a thing here. Sometimes I do this with the camera and just yank it down, and I'll just show you a little character that I just did, and I'm going to have him ready for CTN. So there's a little Darth Maul. Somebody on Facebook called him Darth Small, so I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, so that's that, and I think I answered that question right. Any luck with it? Yeah, so I think I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing and do the fan art because it's just fun. It's a different kind of interaction, and what I might start doing is some bigger, funner illustrations that have color, but that also might have some ties to fan art or something. I've got some ideas that I might experiment with there. Okay, next, Kelly asks, what other sorts of illustration jobs have you had besides illustrating children's books? When I first started, I was doing editorial work, which for magazines and newspapers. I did a ton of that. Worked for a lot of big magazines, a lot of newsstand magazines, a lot of newspapers around the country here in the U.S. And then that branched into doing advertising work. So I've worked for, Pepsi and FedEx and Money. Well, that's a editorial, but S.C. Johnson Wack. I'm just a ton of big clients. I worked for Target for a while, and I did stuff for Leapfrog and different clients like that. Those jobs are kind of tough because they're really controlling, but they pay really well. So it's and I think they know how bad they are, and so they pay to be able to make your life miserable. So those are good, but I think over time it's easy to get tired of doing advertising work because it's not as satisfying and they're very controlling. Okay, Steven says, could you describe how... Okay, so I had actually cut off part. I lost part of this message, but I remember it. And what he's asking, I'll just paraphrase, is when you get a job, he says, do you get a detailed brief or an outline? Describe what how the request is presented to you. And so, so basically, and it's different for every art director that you work with and every editor, and every type of job is just a little bit different. But in general, most of them give you... let me just talk a little bit about how the job might start. It's a little bit different now because we're working in a digital world, on an internet world. You used to get a phone call. Can you imagine that, getting a phone call? So you used to get a phone call. Now it's an email. So an email might say, hey, Will, this is such and such of an art director or an editor. I work at this company, and a lot of times they'll start off with, we're pitching some ideas for illustrators, and your name came up, and we're wondering if you would have availability between these dates. Would you be able to, if we were to choose you, would you be able to do it between these dates? So that's often how it happens. Sometimes the process has gone further than that, and they might say, hey, we would really love for you to do this job. Do you have time to do it? We would need it done by, and then they'll give you the final due date, at which point you can usually push that a little bit. And I suggest that you do, simply because I think it makes you look better. Is that bad to... I think that when you ask for more time, it shows that you're busy, even if you don't really need it. But just asking for 2 weeks or a month longer can be good. And a client is never going to say, no, you can't, and because you asked, I'm not giving you this job. They'll just say no, and you'll still have the job, so you don't have to worry about that. So then you get that process there, and then you say yes, and they might have you sign a non-compete, which basically is a legal document that says you won't talk to anybody about what you're working on until they tell you can, or until after the publication date is usually when it is. Once it's published, I mean, you got it's October right now, 2015, and I heard that there's a fly in my studio. I heard that that the new Star Wars trailer, that no one's getting to see it until even insiders at Disney haven't even seen it, and they're getting kind of upset because everybody's assumed that they've seen it, and they're keeping it really under wraps. And so most clients want their whatever it is they're working on to be secretive, and so they'll have you sign that non-compete, and then sometimes they don't, and then from there you're usually if you're not given a non-compete, you can just ask for a description. Sometimes they'll have everything all laid out and ready to go and ready to send to you. Sometimes they'll describe it. Sometimes what I like to do, and I've talked about this in other videos too, is I like to talk to them about it. I like to, in the email, I say, yeah, I'd really love to talk to you about this, and can we set up a call? Can we talk on the phone? And what that does is it makes you more of a person to the art director, and they feel like they know you. And you can talk about, if you've been to the city they live in, or inevitably you're going to have something in common, and it just makes it better for you as far as working for that client in the future, I think. Then after you talk about it, they might describe it, and if you agree to do it, then they'll probably send you a PDF document with the story, and sometimes there's sketches involved in there, really loose and crappy sketches. Excuse me. Sometimes they're really good sketches, basically, it's a description of what they want you to do, and when you ask this question, what do you get? It's kind of hard to answer, because sometimes it's really detailed and sometimes it's really tight and you know exactly what they want you to do. Other times it's a little scary, because it's here's the story, see what you come up with, kind of a thing, and you're not sure at all. In that case, what I really like to do, in either case, I like to really get characters approved first. So I like to do character sketches and see if I'm hitting the right age, the right type of character, the right type of gesture, if they're comfortable with them. And once they sign off on characters, then it makes it a lot easier to go into other things like the environment and dwellings and interiors and things like that, to make sure the period's right, make sure that you're doing something that's in the realm of what they had sort of envisioned you doing. And then from there on, it's easy to kind of start to go into thumbnails and comps. And I personally like to show a little bit rougher work. I like to do really good environment sketches and really good character sketches and really good prop sketches, so that my style and my competence comes through. And then I like to kind of apologize to the art director and say, I'm going to send you some really rough comps, just to see if the camera angle, the point of view that I'm showing is right, just to see if the character placement is right, just to see if the gesture's right, so we can change things in a really loose state, and then I'll go ahead and send you finished sketches before I ever do any color. And that's what they really care about. They just don't want you going to color before they've really approved some good sketches. So I warn them ahead of time. These are going to look crappy, but they're just for your eyes only. Don't show your client. Don't show the higher up team. This is just between me and you. I want to show you some really loose stuff that I can get done really quick, and you can tell me if I'm headed in the right direction or not. I don't like to spend a lot of time on sketches that are just going to get changed, and polishing up a sketch that I know is probably going to just get changed. Okay, next, here is this is going to be a long video. Hope you guys are getting a lot of drawing in. So this one's kind of a long one, and I'll read this. This is from a Facebook friend, from Sean, and he and his wife had been kind of having a hard time living over in Portugal, and they had kind of a rough situation, and I'm just gonna read this. This is not as much of a question as it is he wanted to kind of get this information out to other artists. So I'm just going to read this, okay? So yeah, Will, we ended up taking your advice. Sorry it's been a long while since we talked. My wife and I were in a really lousy home with rainy fall and winter weather approaching. It was just really tiny. The worst of it was that the home had horrible insulation, so it got moldy during these cold, rainy months. And then he goes on to say that he's having a hard time keeping the workflow going. I'll paraphrase some of this, just because basically, and that he had lost his passion for art just because their apartment was so crappy. And this is one thing that he wanted everyone to know, is that getting into a better situation can make all the difference on your positive mental attitude and how you're feeling about your art, and that they're really closely related. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I've been in some pretty bad. In fact, one of my first apartments when I was going to school, I had my studio in the back porch of the house, and it wasn't insulated. And during the winter, I would go out there in the morning and I couldn't work. There would be ice on my on the top of my water container that I would wash out my brushes in. And so I couldn't work out there. I'd open up the door and try to get some heat to come in from the kitchen, but I just couldn't work out there. I'd end up working on the kitchen table, and then that wasn't good. The light was bad. I didn't have my good light set up. So, your setup matters. And, if you can't find a good place to set up, it's going to affect the way that you create. He says, well, we ended up finding the perfect living situation that works for us freelancers, and he and his wife both freelance. We now live in a 90 square meter, 2-story home. It's 4.5 times the space of their previous home. And basically what they've got is their rent went down a lot simply because they're taking care of, he says, we live in an attached house of a retired Portuguese colonel, completely separate. And so this guy's 92 years old, and he needs help with the house, and he needs a little bit of help, I guess, with his health. And so they spend about, I think 2 or 3 hours in the morning is there, in order to get that cheaper rent, they spend a couple hours in the morning helping him with yard work and different things around the house and maintaining everything. And then they get to spend the rest of the time working on their art. And he says, this kind of setup works perfectly for freelancers because we were almost always at home. There was another couple that was trying to get that, but then they gave it to them. So he highly recommends that other artists who might be struggling with a similar situation look for something like that, because it's made all the difference in the world. And thanks, Sean. I really appreciate that. I think that those kinds of ideas can really help. And by the way, that's actually how I broke into the business. And one of the reasons why I wanted to read that on here is because when I first started, I left school out here in Utah, and then I went back home to Maryland and took care of my grandfather, who had just come through heart surgery and didn't do very well and was stuck in a wheelchair and needed help with everything. And so my parents had made an addition on their house, so my grandparents could live there. And so I ended up living there with my wife, and we ended up taking care of them and doing the exact same thing. And the amount of time that I had to spend taking care of my grandfather was very small compared to how much time I had to work on my artwork. And it was the perfect setup. So just something to think about. Okay. The next one is next question is from Mike. Can an artist have more than one style? Lately I've been struggling with this idea. I feel like I have more than one. It gets a bit confusing when I sit down to draw. I feel like I have to choose which one I'll draw in. I've heard style is supposed to be a thing that flows naturally. So yeah, basically, I think the more you draw, the more you'll start to gravitate towards. You won't think about style. It'll just flow forth. And so when I start to draw, I don't think about style. I just think about the things that I like. I don't even think about that anymore. I just kind of have a natural default mode. And sometimes I start to feel like it gets a little boring because I don't feel like I push it a whole lot, but it feels right usually. And so, but the answer to can you have more than one style is absolutely you can. I think the most important thing is to market it separately on your website so that a client can see that they're not mixed together, that you might have one tab or one area, one gallery for one style and one gallery for another, but they need to be clearly marked as separate. And that way, and have a decent body of work under each style, so that when an art director looks at you and proposes you or thinks about using you, they'll be fairly confident that they're going to get the style that they want, then not the other style. Okay, the next email is from Cassette, and I hope I'm saying that right. Do you put your email on business cards? Where would you? And so there's a bunch of questions here. Okay, so do you put your email on business cards? Yes. where would you get cellophane backing for a good price? And I think he is talking about Comic-Con. And I put a link on my Comic-Con videos, the last two, I believe, clearbags.com. So that's a place that you can get it, but there's a lot of places online. If you look for artwork bags or cellophane bags for artwork, there's a bunch of different sites that'll sell them. Another question: if I had to pick one, do you recommend Etsy or Society6? They're very different. Etsy's going to have you go into the post office because you have to do the fulfillment yourself, and Society6 is going to do everything for you. So you really can't compare them. They're really different services. Etsy is going to take you're gonna be printing your work yourself, and Society6, they're gonna make those prints for you. So they're totally different services, and so you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to print everything yourself, package everything yourself, and then go to the post office and collect the money? And you'll make more. You'll make a higher percentage per piece. You'll make more profit per piece that you sell on Etsy, assuming that you are charging a decent amount. Let's say you charge the same amount that your stuff would list for on Society6, then your profit margin would go up, but your time commitment would go way up too. So you have to decide that balance. Is it worth it? And then what was the most effective and reasonably cheap setup for a table that you saw at Comic-Con? And I would say, I loaded up on prints, and I spent a lot of money on prints and t-shirts. That's where most of the money went. I would say you could probably set up a table for a few $100. You probably wouldn't have a very elaborate setup for that, but I think you could do it pretty easily and have a pretty decent setup for a few $100. Now that's including, I'm thinking you're including a lot, all the stuff that you need, not including your prints, but just everything that you're going to need to make a sign or a banner, and then some kind of display to put up to put your stuff on. But I think you can definitely do it for relatively cheap. Okay, so next question is from Carrie. Have you faced moral conflicts in your career path? Turned down a job because of content agenda. Thanks for all your good work. Okay, so and he asked me this privately because he said you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. And yeah, I have faced a couple of moral conflicts, and that is both of them had me illustrating advertisements for alcohol, and this was and I because of my religious beliefs, I don't drink alcohol. I don't hold it against anybody. I don't look at someone that's drinking alcohol and think that they're a bad person at all. So please don't think that. It's just a personal choice, a personal decision. But because of that, I don't want to help other people drink too. Not that it's evil, but I mean, I think that it's like anything. If you don't do it responsibly, you can get hurt. And at the time that I turned down an ad for Smirnoff alcohol that would have paid a lot of money. And I turned down another one for Coors Brewing Company that would have paid a ton of money for a Halloween promotion. But you have to keep in mind that they wanted me to illustrate with my style, which is a children's book style. And the last thing I wanted to do was make alcohol look really fun at Halloween, where teenagers are going to look at it and maybe, decide to drink and drive and then kill somebody or kill themselves. So I turned those down, and I felt good for doing it. But I wouldn't hold it over anybody for choosing to do that either. I mean, that's a personal choice. And I think that everybody should have that option. It was funny because my rep at the time knew that I probably would turn it down. And she asked me, she said, I have a really big job for you, and I'm pretty sure you're going to turn it down. And I think she was a little bit disappointed too, because I mean, she would have got a good commission off of it, but she was totally supportive, and I really thank her. And that was Joanne Shuna. If you're watching, I thought you were really classy when that happened. Let's see. Did I already read this one? Yeah, I already read that one. So that's another one. And then I think, let's see. Okay, so here's another one. Okay, so this one is from, and I don't have the name, I'm sorry. I piece these together, so I really want you to put these on hashtag #AskWillTerry on Twitter in the future, so that I can keep them all straight, and I'll have your names and everything. The name got cut off on this one. So basically, this is a long one, but the question is basically about exercise and staying healthy, and that sitting is really bad for you, and sitting all the time. And this person is saying, I'm working about 10 hours a day, and he or she has a timer, and every 25 minutes I'm getting up and walking, stretching for 5 minutes, and then starting to draw again. Does every artist have these kinds of muscle issues? So suffering from, I'm wondering if I'm the only one who suffers occasionally from small muscle pains because of drawing. Like, no, you're not alone. Neck and back ache and all that stuff. So my thing is, I'm kind of definitely an overweight guy. So I'm probably like the last person that you should ask this to. But I do exercise every day. It's very rare that a day goes by where I don't exercise. And what I do is I go for long walks up in the mountains, and I also play racquetball. And so if it's a racquetball day, then I get a really good exercise doing that for about an hour and a half. I also, in the winter, I'll hike up we've got these roads out here, and I'll hike up those roads with my dog and ride my snowboard back down. And so if I don't get out, it's such a habit now that if I don't get out and do that, I feel horrible, and I also lose motivation. You can only sit at your desk and draw for so long. You really only have really quality hours. I mean, you guys all know that you've sat there and stared at your work and you don't know what to do, and your brain is going dead, because you're sitting there. You got to get up, and I think that getting up and having a timer is a great idea. And I think that having some exercises that you love. So when I play racquetball, it's not exercise because it's so fun. You're focused on trying to get the ball and trying to beat the other guy, that you're not thinking about it. And then you come out of there, soaking wet. And if I try to get that same kind of exercise through running, it just feels like exercise the whole time. So I would suggest finding something that you love to do, because I think that there was a time where I used to run and I loved it, and you get that runner's high going on. So you got to do something, because it is an unhealthy lifestyle to sit here. And that is one of the big regrets that I have about doing this, is that at certain times my life gets really, really out of balance on how much time I'm spending in the seat. Okay, so the title question, the one that you've all been waiting for, this is the last one. This one's from AutoFit. I think that's the username. Hi, Will. Haha. Where were you 5 years ago in my life? I wish I could have had a conversation with you in person. I know there are boundaries, and this was based on another video. I know there are boundaries between authors and illustrators. What do you do if you're reading their manuscript and it doesn't make sense? Like large loopholes. Can the illustrator make suggestions to help the flow of the story make sense, or should the illustrator stay out of it? A self-published author, really low end and inexperienced, got really mad at me when I told them their story didn't make sense, and gave a suggestion of how it could be better. If it's not the illustrator's place, how does the illustrator approach this type of conflict? Great question. And thanks, because it really gave me a good title. It is a great question. And there are different answers for that question. So let's start with scenario number one. You're working for the type of client that you are talking about, a low-end, inexperienced, self-published author. I would put it to them this way. It's funny because a lot of times these guys, they want to pay you $1,000 or $500 or even $2,000 or $3,000, maybe $4,000 or something like that. It's not a lot of money, and yes, maybe if you're not that experienced and you're taking that kind of a job, it's funny because they always feel like they're up here and you're down here, when really, I think what you need to do is try to say, look, we're doing this together. You wrote the story, or maybe this is, let's see. Yeah. Yeah, you wrote the story and I'm illustrating it. So you did your job, and now it's time for me to do my job. But for me to do my job, I have to be able to understand this story and maybe make a few suggestions. Now, if it's their story and if they're the one paying you the money, in the end, they're going to be able to dictate, whether or not you're going to be able to make changes. Personally, I would err on the side of saying, hey, I found a few conflicts that don't seem to make sense to me, but hey, maybe I've got it wrong, and maybe I'm not understanding where you're coming from. Can you explain this? Can you help me understand? I think if it depends on how you approach the person. If you're very humble when you approach them and say, hey, I see that you've got this problem here, and I want this story to be really good, and I don't want the end user, I don't want the consumer to look at it and think it's dumb, because neither of us want a dumb story out there. I mean, so I want to help make it better, and I just want to ask these questions. If somebody gets mad at you for approaching them like that, that's on them, in my opinion. Now, if you're working for a medium to a high-end publisher, you're going to work through your editor, and they don't want you talking to the author for this very reason. So the author writes a story, they submit it to a publishing company. If it gets accepted, they get a letter of acceptance. They work with the editor. The editor asks them to make changes, and they'll go back and forth on the story, making some changes. By the time that you get asked to illustrate it, they will send you the manuscript, and it's probably already been fixed, but there are still sometimes discrepancies and stupid things in there that you see that don't make sense, that slip past the gatekeeper, that slip past the editor. And in that case, it is totally within your right and your duty, in my opinion, to carefully approach the editor and say, hey, I don't understand this. It seems like it could be a conflict, but maybe I don't understand. Can you help me understand what's going on here? And then explain it to him. And most often the editor will go, oh, yeah, that's a problem. I'll talk to the author, and they'll do it for you. And then sometimes the author will explain to them why they want it that way, but they'll usually come up with a solution. There's only been a few times where I've seen some things in books that have really bugged me, and they had to stay that way. But it happens, and in the end of the day, probably the best answer for this is, if you are frustrated because you have to illustrate someone else's book that you don't like, the best solution is become an author yourself and write your own story and illustrate it, and that way it won't be stupid, or at least in your mind it won't be stupid. And there you go. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe. I'm supposed to tell you to leave a comment, even though I think that's kind of silly, but YouTube is now telling me, tell your people to leave comments, because it bumps the video up and it does all that good stuff and everything, and liking and stuff. And so if you like this channel, it'll help promote this channel a little bit better. Okay, I'll see you on my next video. Thanks for watching.